Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, gang. All right, so welcome to week 10. Oh my God, time flies. We are certainly having fun. Speaking of having fun, let's see where we are at, where we're going, etc., etc. So as always, we are going to start with where we were, where we're at, where we're going. So scroll up to week 8 for a second. Midterm exam. I am working hard on getting them graded. Today and tomorrow I've set aside for grading, so they should be done by this weekend. That's the goal. Written response 2 is graded. Grades are in the grade book, which means the forum for the FLQ Bin Laden discussion is active. You have until, because I meant to do it in the morning. I ended up doing it in the evening. Basically, I'm giving you guys an extra 24 hours. So rather than by Friday at 5, the forum will close by Saturday. Saturday by 5 p.m. That is Regina time. Next week, fall break. Yay! You have my permission. Outside of work and other things you absolutely must do, you have my permission to take a mental health day. Take a day off. Don't do any schoolwork. Relax. Do not feel guilty about it. You have my permission. But after fall break, we have week 12, where your guided written assignment on Captain America Civil War is due. Here's the Dropbox, as always. The assignment, guided written assignment right here. So make sure you answer those questions for citing the movie. All you need to do is parentheses and give me a timestamp. So if you use any quotes, anything like that, anything you feel you need to cite, parentheses, timestamp. That'll be fine. So yeah, that's where we are. That is where we are going. So in that case, let's get there. There we go. All right, so as always, ooh, almost right on. As always, we are starting with the key terms and hard words. Get my face a little bit out of the way. I'm going to be using one PowerPoint for both videos this week. So be aware of that. So the key terms and hard words are for both videos, not just the one. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're talking about the Hashemite kingdoms. We're going to sort of start off by talking about the mandate system, and then talk about problems in the Hejaz in this video. And then in the next video, we're going to look at Syria and Iraq, and then the Transjordan. So let's look at the mandate system first. This will be the system under which the territory from the vanquished powers, that is a triple alliance, Germany, the German Empire, or what was the German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. This will be the system under which the territory of those powers will be administered by the victorious powers, particularly France and Britain. In essence, the mandate system will be the first of two attempts by Britain to try to reconcile the promises made to the Middle East. So the mandate system was, as this says, established by the League of Nations Covenant. It was established by Article 22 of the League of Nations Covenant. So the charter, basically the legislation that created the League of Nations, Article 22 created the mandate system. And Article 22 says, quote, "To those colonies and territories which, as a consequence of the late war, have ceased to be under the sovereignty of the states which formerly governed them." In other words, colonies and territories which used to be part of the Ottomans and the Germans in particular, and which are inhabited by peoples not yet able to stand by themselves. Inhabited by peoples not yet able to stand by themselves under the strenuous conditions of the modern world. In other words, territories that Britain and France felt weren't quite ready for self-government. There should be applied the principle that the well-being and development of such peoples form a sacred trust of civilization. Sort of getting this idea of civilized versus uncivilized out there. And I mean, we've seen it with respect to Syria and Lebanon with, or sorry, that was my other class. We did FLQ. So we will see this with respect to Sykes-Picot. We will see this with respect to some of the other areas that we're talking about. There should be applied the principle that the well-being and development of such peoples form a sacred trust of civilization, and that securities for the performance of this trust should be embodied in this covenant. This is a very paternalistic idea. Paternalism is this idea that one group acts like a parent to another group. So in this case, Europe is acting like a parent to these territories and colonies. So this is a very paternalistic idea. The former Western European states no longer govern them. Germany or the Ottomans no longer govern these territories. Yet these colonies are, quote, not yet able to stand by themselves. So this is this idea that England and Britain, in theory, should act like a parent guiding these people, guiding these countries, these colonies towards nationhood. And so we'll keep along with this idea of parent versus child. So there are three classes of mandates. There's class A mandates, Syria and Mesopotamia. So basically former Ottoman territories. There's class B mandates, former German colonies in West and Central Africa. And then class C mandates, former German colonies in Southwest Africa and the Pacific. For our purposes, we're going to look at class A mandates and Palestine. So class A mandates, we're going to shift over to a map. Boop, map. So basically we're looking at the area set up by the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Class A mandates are going to involve Syria under France, so Lebanon and Syria, and Mesopotamia. So this red zone under British control, so Iraq, as well as this orange zone, so Transjordan and basically the rest of Iraq. These are for a Class A mandate are former colonies or territories that, quote, reached a stage of development where their existence as independent nations can be provisionally recognized. Former colonies and territories that have, quote, reached a stage of development where their existence as independent nations can be provisionally recognized. Subject to the rendering of administrative advice and assistance by a mandatory until such times as they are able to stand alone. So if we're taking this idea of Western Europe acting as parents, so Class C mandates, they are in a position where they're effectively children. They are toddlers at the most, or perceived as toddlers. So the parent has to take a much more active role in making sure the child, doesn't say burn their hand on a hot stovetop. Class B mandates. So, nope. Class B mandates, former German colonies in West and Central Africa. These are, if we're using the idea of child and parent, these would be tweens. They're not quite children, but they're not quite teenagers. They're in that in-between phase. So parents still have to look out for them, but they have a little bit more independence to decide for themselves. Class A mandates would be like teenagers, 16-year-olds. They are old enough to do certain things on their own, drive a car, for example. But, well, teenagers make dumb mistakes. Teenagers make dumb decisions. So the parent has to be there to just sort of make sure that the teenager doesn't make a really stupid decision. So kind of with, they're kind of working together. So parent and teenager. But as we will see, teenagers tend to rebel against their parents. And we're going to see something similar happen with Class A mandates. And then we have Palestine, this area right here in yellow, the international zone on this map. Palestine is a special case in that it is not mentioned in the League of Nations Covenant, but for all intents and purposes, treated as a British mandate. And so it is going to be out of Palestine and Mesopotamia that Britain is going to try to keep its promises to King Hussein and his sons on the one hand, and the Zionists on the other. So basically, again, what we're going to see, and we'll talk more about this later on, is when we talk about the Transjordan, is Palestine is basically going to be broken off of the Transjordan mandate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So that's the mandate system, one of the two ways that Britain tried to reconcile its promises to the Middle East. The McMahon-Hussein correspondences, Sykes-Picot, and the Balfour Declaration. So let's look at problems in the Hejaz. And so the reason why this lecture is called the Hashemite Kingdoms is because these men here, the sons of Hussein bin Ali, they all, and Hussein bin Ali himself, all come from the Hashem family, Hashem. And so when they get their independent kingdoms, these kingdoms are going to be known as Hashemite kingdoms, as in they are kingdoms led by the Hashem family. So we're going to look at the problems in the Hejaz. So now that we've talked about the promises made by the British government regarding the Middle East, we're going to see how some of these promises played out and are still playing out today. Because after the war, Great Britain did what it promised to Hussein, the Sharif of Mecca. It acknowledged the independence of his kingdom, the kingdom of Hejaz, located on the east coast of the Red Sea. And so Hussein, when he rose up in revolt against the Ottomans, declared an independent kingdom of the Hejaz at the start of the Arab Revolt in June 1916, and Britain immediately recognized the state. In 1924, jumping ahead about 8 years, we have an independent and secular Turkey, which under Ataturk abolished the position of caliph, which was a political religious leader of all Arabs, of all Muslims. And so with that position abolished, Hussein went, oh, hey, this is great. I control the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, so I am going to assume the position as the political religious leader of all the Arabs, which is going to cause a smidgen of a problem. Now, you're probably wondering why you don't know about a country named Hejaz today. Well, because one of the positive things that the Ottoman Empire did for the Arab people was it mitigated the rivalries between the different factions in this whole area. In the Arabian Peninsula, the Ottomans mediated the rivalries between the various factions. And even during the so-called Arab Revolt, which occurred predominantly in the Hejaz and basically the west side of the Arabian Peninsula. Even during the Arab Revolt, the Arabs were not completely united. And so with the First World War and the subsequent dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire, there was no overall force to sort of calm down the internal rivalries between different families and different factions. Now, the major rival, the major power to Hussein and his sons in Arabia, this area right here, was the family in control of the neighboring territory of Najd, Najd. The Najd, it's the highlands that surrounded the Hejaz as well as the Arabian desert. This family was the House of Saud. The House of Saud, S-A''ud. Led by this man right here, Abdulaziz, but once he sort of consolidates everything, he will take the name Ibn Saud. So let's talk a little bit about the House of Saud. Based out of Riyadh, there we go, right about there, the modern day capital of Saudi Arabia, just to give you a little spoiler warning. The House of Saud was actually exiled from the homeland in 1891 after a civil war between two factions of the family. So one faction of the family, Ibn Rashid, who was formerly subordinate to the House of Saud, used the opportunity of the civil war to step in, take over Riyadh, and exile the House of Saud from Saudi, what will become Saudi Arabia, and Riyadh. And he gained acceptance from the Ottoman Turks. They said, yeah, fine, you control that area, that's great. Now, during their exile, Abdulaziz, who was only about 20 years old at the time, leading the House of Saud in exile throughout the Arabian Peninsula, well, they formally associated themselves with members of the Bedouin tribes. Now, if you remember our discussion with respect to Algeria and the Bedouins, we have Bedouins along the northern rim of the Sahara Desert, as well as in the Arabian Desert. Now, the ones in the Arabian Desert tended to be a little more fanatical with their form of Islam. They tended to be what were referred to as Wahhabists. This was a sect, S-E-C-T, of Islam that called for Islam to basically go back to its founding principles, that Islam had been corrupted by modernity, corrupted, and therefore for Islam to reach its past potential, that it expanded throughout North Africa, through Spain, through Europe, etc., it must go back to its founding principles. And remember, Wahhabists are those who believe that Islam had, quote, lost its way and must return to a more traditional form of Islam vis-a-vis modernity. And so the House of Saud, needing help, needing support from somewhere, associated themselves with these more fanatical Bedouin, who basically no quarter was asked nor was given. And so in 1903, so 12 years after their exile, the House of Saud, led by 20-year-old Abdulaziz, soon to be referred to as Ibn Saud, recaptured Riyadh from Ibn Rashid and started a two-year guerrilla war against Rashid and the Ottomans, whom Rashid asked for support. He said, hey, you supported me when I took over. Now you got to come in and bring in some soldiers. And after about 2 years of a guerrilla war between Abdulaziz and Rashid and the Ottomans. Well, the Ottomans basically said, "No, this isn't working for us. We're going back to Turkey. You two handle it yourselves." So the Ottomans withdrew their support from Ibn Rashid after about 2 years, so about 1905, withdrew their support of Rashid, but it took Ibn Saud Abdulaziz until about 1912 to recapture the entirety of the Najd. Now let's bring the British in, because during the First World War, the British contacted Ibn Saud just as they contacted Hussein, the Sharif of Mecca, to feel out whether or not they could spark an Arab revolt against the Ottomans. Now, this was a bit of a case of the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. So, with respect to the Middle East, there were two sort of centers of power for Britain over who will control policy over this area here. On the one hand, we had Egypt. The High Commissioner of Egypt believed that he controlled policy over the Arabian Peninsula, over the Trucial states, Trucial. These are states that had engaged in truces or alliances with Britain for defense in exchange for economic benefits. These are states like Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, etc., etc. And then you had Delhi, that is India, who believed that because they basically controlled the majority of South Asia, they had oversight over basically everything to the west as well, up to, but not including Egypt. So you had two different groups leading policy over the Middle East, and we saw what Henry McMahon did with respect to the Hejaz. Well, Delhi sort of did something similar. They contacted Ibn Saud to sort of feel out whether Ibn Saud would rise up in rebellion against the Ottomans. And so they sent a British officer, a British captain, to sort of act as a go-between between the House of Saud and Delhi. The British officer in charge of the mission to Saud was Captain William Shakespeare. Yes, that was his name. And so, similar to what happened with Britain and Hussein bin Ali, the British entered into a treaty with Ibn Saud to induce an Arab revolt against the Ottomans. And so in December 1915, we have the Treaty of Darin, Darin. And what the Treaty of Darin did was it made the territory controlled by Ibn Saud into a British protectorate. This helped define the border between the Najd and the Hejaz. And in exchange for making this territory into a British protectorate, Ibn Saud pledged to the British, yes, we will revolt against the Ottoman Empire, against the Ottomans. It's important to note that both Hussein and in the Hejaz and Ibn Saud in the Najd received British economic and military assistance. The difference was Hussein bin Ali and his sons engaged in a guerrilla war, engaged in an active revolt against the Ottoman Turks, and directly associated themselves with the British, attacking Medina, attacking train lines, attacking supply lines for the Ottomans, harassing the Ottomans behind the lines while the British army pushed up through the Levant, so through Palestine, Lebanon, and up that way. So Hussein was receiving money, gold, was receiving military assistance, and actually used these weapons used the military, the economic assistance. Ibn Saud understood which way the wind was blowing. He understood that the British will win. By December 1915, the British had already sort of took the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, leading into the Persian Gulf, and were preparing to press upwards through the Tigris and Euphrates. And so he understood, okay, the British are going to be ahead of us. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go, yeah, British, yeah, we need weapons, we need money, but it's going to take some time for me to properly arm and outfit my army. So just keep bringing me money, keep bringing me weapons, keep bringing me ammunition, and we will continue to prepare for a revolt. And so 1915 turned into 1916. 1916 turned into 1917, 1917 turned into 1918, and still no revolt by Ibn Saud. And they were still sending him gold, still sending him weapons, and he was still arming his Bedouin supporters and building an army. And so in the post-war period, the House of Saud, in control of the Najd, engaged in a campaign of military expansion, so pushing further out, sort of pressing against, raiding border territories to see how strong they were, while the Hashemites, the family of Hussein the Sharif of Mecca, attempted to consolidate their position politically. And so things were going okay for the Hejaz, for Hussein bin Ali, until so Ibn Saud was raiding them, they were pushing back. They were able to get a little bit of support from other Arab states until again in 1924, when Hussein bin Ali alienated a fair amount of Arab supporters, when Hussein declared himself caliph, the religious political leader of all the Arabs, which dwindled his military support against Ibn Saud. So many Arabs were thinking that Hussein was putting himself in a position that he shouldn't be in. And so support that he was getting, military support that he was getting from other Arabs to help defend against military raids from Ibn Saud quickly evaporated. And so shortly after taking the position of caliph, Hussein abdicated the position of king of the Hejaz to his oldest son, Ali. And Hussein bin Ali goes into exile. The House of Saud military pressure against the Hejaz was such that Ali was only king of Hejaz for a year, 1924 to 1925, before he too was pushed and forced into exile. And so with the Najd military success, the British government acknowledged the annexation of the Hejaz by the House of Saud and declared the independent state of the Hejaz and Najd ruled by the House of Saud. And so with control over Mecca and Medina, the two most important cities in Islam, the third being Jerusalem, Ibn Saud declared the creation of his own state, declared the creation of Saudi Arabia, and effected control over the Arabian Peninsula, ending over 700 years of Hashemite, the House of Hashem, rule over Mecca and Medina. So by 1925, all this territory here, the Najd, Hejaz, and this border area here would become Saudi Arabia. So what is going to happen to Hussein's other sons, Faisal and Abdullah? Well, stay tuned. Stay tuned. We're going to see what happens with them in the next video. We're going to talk about Syria and Iraq in the next video. We're going to talk about the Transjordan and talk a little bit about Palestine. All right, so I'm going to stop talking here. I'm going to let you guys go forth, slay dragons, and we'll pick up with our discussion in the next video. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.